The cold dusk still clung to the vast Montana badlands when Lydia huddled by the ruins of what once had been a hopeful homestead. Her weary eyes, lined with sorrow and determination, searched the horizon as the wind whispered secrets through the sagebrush. In the fading light, the little cabin's broken timbers and frost-rimmed eaves bore silent testimony to her recent struggles. Now, with a bitter winter fading into uneasy spring, hunger gnawed at her and her young son, Isaac, whose hopeful eyes, no older than 7, reflected the hardships of a barren life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches your heart, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've got something extra special saved just for you. Lydia's world had been reduced to the relentless pursuit of sustenance. Each day, she scoured the dry, stony ground for anything to feed Isaac, her heart heavy with memories of better times now lost. The death of her husband had left her both financially and emotionally broken, yet she clung to the slim promise of redemption, a promise that might lie in the kindness of strangers. That night, the stars above, splintered on the high ridges like fragile shards of silver, witnessed her silent prayers as she rocked Isaac to sleep on a threadbare blanket outside the cabin. The bitter wind seemed to sigh like a forgotten vow, echoing her desperate wish for a miracle. It was in that haunting, cold twilight that fate intervened. A solitary figure appeared on the distant trail, a lone rider emerging from the dark silhouette of the badlands. The figure rode with measured gait, his horse's hooves striking the hard-packed earth with quiet, relentless rhythm. Clad in a worn duster that flapped in the wind, the rancher drew nearer until a gleam in his eyes and a determined set of his jaw came into clear view. His name was Micah, and though the harshness of life had etched its lines upon his face, there was an undeniable kindness in his gaze. As Micah rode past the dilapidated cabin, his keen eyes took in the desperate scene. A frail widow, struggling to feed her child with what little she could muster, in a silence punctuated by Isaac's soft, weary cries. Without hesitation, he slowed his horse and dismounted gracefully beside the creaking porch. The chill in the air did not stop him from removing his threadbare blanket and draping it around the shivering child, whose small face brightened in unexpected relief. "Ma'am," Micah began in a low, earnest tone that carried the warmth of a long-forgotten kindness, "I couldn't help but notice you and your little one. I've got some provisions in my wagon. It's not much, but it might help you get through this bitter night." The words, simple yet buoyed by genuine compassion, caught Lydia by surprise. Her heart, long accustomed to indifference, fluttered with a timid hope that she had nearly forgotten. For a long moment, Lydia studied the rancher, her eyes moist with a mixture of gratitude and guarded caution. Life had taught her that even a gentle voice might hide ulterior motives. Yet Micah's steady gaze and the kindness in the way he extended his hand seemed to convey a truth that warmed even the coldest corners of her soul. "Thank you," Lydia replied softly, her voice cracking with exhaustion and relief. I haven't had a decent meal in days, and Isaac's been so hungry. We're barely holding on." As she spoke, Isaac clutched a small tin cup, his eyes wide and hopeful at the sight of the stranger. Micah smiled gently, nodding as he gestured toward a wagon tied at the edge of a salt-crusted trail. Together, they walked to the wagon under a vault of ancient pines. The wagon creaked and groaned as Micah swung open the battered door to reveal a modest bounty of dried beans, salted meat, and a stubby loaf of bread. Simple fare, yet enough to rekindle a spark of hope. The aroma of the food, rich and warm in contrast to the cool night air, evoked memories of communal feasts and long-lost family dinners. Lydia's stomach clenched uncomfortably as she accepted the provisions, while Isaac's eyes danced with delight at the promise of a meal. Micah gently helped Lydia prepare a small fire near the wagon, using stray bits of kindling gathered from the nearby brush. As the fire slowly grew and the food began to heat, the three sat in a quiet circle, the flicker of flames illuminating their faces in a soft, golden glow that seemed almost surreal against the backdrop of the unyielding wilderness. In that intimate moment, the harsh reality of the wild met the gentle promise of human connection. But as the fire crackled, A faint sound disrupted the warm silence. Far off on the rugged trail, where the moon still guarded the remnants of night, there came the soft padding of hooves, a sound out of place in the quiet solitude of the desert. Lydia's eyes frequently darted to the dark horizon, now clouded with uncertainty. Was it merely a stray animal, or did it bear the scent of something far more ominous, a warning perhaps of restless strangers or hostile raiders? Micah noticed her unease. "Don't worry, ma'am," he said reassuringly. "I've ridden these trails long enough to know their whispers. It might not be trouble, but we should keep our wits about us." His tone was gentle, yet a trace of caution underpinned his words. The distant sound of hooves, soft yet insistent, curled to the night air like a secret too heavy to ignore. As the meal finished and the last bits of food warmed their bellies, Lydia carefully tucked Isaac into a rough bed of straw inside the cabin. Once his small eyelids fluttered shut, she stepped outside with Micah to stoke the dwindling fire. Against the infinite canvas of the starlit badlands, they spoke in hushed voices about dreams, losses, and the hard truth of life on the frontier. "I lost my husband last winter," Lydia admitted quietly, the pain in her voice mingling with the low hum of the wind. "And every day feels like I'm walking a path without end." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears beneath the pale light of a crescent moon. "And now, I struggle not just for myself, but for our little boy, who deserves a future brighter than this desolation." Micah's gaze softened, his own past etched into the lines of his weathered face. "I've known loss too," he said, his voice heavy with quiet understanding. "Sometimes the world deals us a hand so cruel it feels like there's nothing left to hold on to. But maybe there's more for us out there than just surviving the night." His words, like a gentle caress against the harsh winds, offer a fragile possibility of a tomorrow built on mutual care and the shared warmth of human kindness. Just then, the sound of hooves grew louder. The delicate peace was shattered as a series of quick, deliberate tracks appeared near the edge of the cabin's threshold, a sign that someone or something was moving closer. Lydia's heart pounded in her chest, and Micah's eyes narrowed as the dark shapes of riders emerged in the distance. Was it a reminder of past hardships, a warning from a rival, or perhaps a harbinger of new danger in these unforgiving lands? The questions hung in the cold night air like a specter, leaving the ranch to brace itself as uncertainty loomed on the horizon. In the final, charged moment of that night, as the fire flickered low and the first hints of dawn tinged the sky with a soft glow, Lydia's weary gaze lifted toward the approaching tracks. Her resolve hardened in silent defiance. Even as she struggled to feed her child and survive the harsh mysteries of the Wild West, she sensed that perhaps fate had offered her more than a meal, that it might be the first step toward a future filled with hope, community, and the promise of redemption. As the figures drew nearer, their silhouettes melting into the tentative light of morning, Lydia and Micah exchanged a look that spoke of cautious anticipation and quiet determination. The night had given them a reprieve, but the uncertain tracks at the doorstep of Salt Creek Ranch whispered of trials yet to come. The hoofbeats grew louder, shattering the fragile peace of their firelit night. In the pale light of early dawn, the sound of measured hooves echoed across the frost-laced sagebrush and rocky trails. Margaret, a weary widow whose life had been steeped in hardship and loss, clutched her son Samuel close as they emerged from the ruins of her forlorn homestead in the Montana Badlands. Moments earlier, a solitary rancher named Elias had come to their aid, offering not only a modest meal and warmth by a small fire, but also igniting in Margaret a cautious hope for a better tomorrow. Now, however, the soft padding of hooves on hard earth had stirred old fears. The distant track, illuminated by the first blush of a breaking dawn, hinted at the presence of another traveler, or perhaps something far less benign. Elias led the way along a narrow trail bordered by frost-rimmed boulders and clusters of barren pines. The brisk morning air, laden with the scent of damp earth and the tang of metal from his tin cup, urged every footstep onward. As they advanced, the steady rhythm of hooves grew closer, echoing off the rocky outcrops and stirring the silence like laughter in an empty hall. "Hold on," Elias murmured in a measured, reassuring tone, his eyes fixed on the dark horizon. The rancher's gentle command was meant both to steady Margaret's racing heart and to remind Samuel that safety, fragile though it might be, was within reach. Margaret's tired gaze met his, and in that fleeting moment, the bitter chill of loneliness and despair began to thaw. Soon, as the trio rounded a turn along a ridge where the morning light broke in golden shards, a solitary rider emerged from a thicket of scrub. He was a wiry man with a threadbare duster and a wary expression that betrayed his uncertainty. This stranger, whose presence disrupted the gathering quiet, rode slowly until he halted a few paces away. His horse, equally lean and alert, shifted restlessly, its eyes flickering from one face to the next. "Good morning," the stranger greeted, his voice rough and edged with suspicion, yet not without a trace of courteous reserve. "I'm Owen, a trader passing through these parts. I couldn't help but notice your company, traveling together as it seems." His tone was measured, though his eyes darted about as if assessing every potential risk. Margaret's heart pounded. Her thoughts teetered between grateful relief at the well-meaning tone and an instinctive wariness born of years of solitude. "Good morning," she managed, keeping her voice soft and steady, though inside a maelstrom of apprehension and hope swirled. Samuel, perched on Elias's horse, clutched his small worn cap, his gaze wide with curiosity. Elias inclined his head slightly in reply. "We're heading to the nearby homestead for shelter, a safe place, if you will. The night was cold, and we've managed to share what little we had." His statement, calm and unpretentious, conveyed a quiet dignity born of everyday struggles on the frontier. Owen's eyes narrowed slowly, as if he weighed their words carefully. "I know these lands well," he said, the cadence of his voice carrying the whisper of trade routes and distant outposts. "There's unrest brewing in the valleys, rumors of harsh weather and disputes among local folk. You do well to be cautious." His remarks, though couched as friendly advice, hinted at an undercurrent of local gossip and uncertainty. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. The specter of isolation was not new to her, but the possibility that forces beyond her control were at work made her pulse quicken. "Unrest?" she echoed softly, searching Owen's face for sincerity. Despite the stranger's guarded demeanor, his words struck a chord in her. She felt it too, a troubling tremor in the land after the long, unforgiving winter. Elias exchanged a brief look with Owen before responding. "The spring has been unpredictable, and some say that the melting snows have stirred conflicts between neighbors. But we've been managing through it so far." His voice held a patient resolve that, for a moment, reassured his small company. Yet the unspoken tension lingered in the air like the remnants of a fading storm. As they journeyed further along the ridgeline, the gentle repair of a broken wagon wheel caught the attention of Samuel. The child, his small hands eager to learn amid adversity, observed Elias with fascination as the rancher knelt beside a creaking wagon. With quiet concentration and the practiced ease of one who had lived many hard years, Elias retrieved a handful of sturdy leather straps from his pack. Patiently, he demonstrated how to secure the broken wheel to the chassis, each knot tied with deliberate care. "There's strength even in mending," he said softly, his voice a quiet mantra to the observant child. Samuel mimicked the motions, his eyes widening with newfound determination. Margaret, watching the tender moment between Elias and her son, felt a surge of gratitude. In that act of simple skill and shared labor, she sensed the seeds of a budding family, a chosen kinship that transcended blood and circumstance. Yet even as hope stirred in her heart, the subtle threat of the passing wind, and perhaps more ominously, the murmurs of local unrest, continued to cast long shadows. As the day advanced and the cold began to lift, the sky blossomed in hues of amber and rose. The trio, accompanied now by a subdued yet intrigued Owen, approached a modest outpost near the edge of a pine-clad valley. The outpost, a constructed refuge of weathered planks and tin roofs, offered the promise of community amidst isolation. It was here that whispers of local debate and the cautious passing of trade messages could be heard, laced with both hope and disdain. Inside the outpost common area, a few rugged souls milled about quietly, their conversations low and wary. One such man, a salt and pepper-haired figure named Tobias, glanced suspiciously at Owen as he entered. Tobias's eyes, sharp like the pointed peaks beyond, indicated that he was no stranger to the subtle politics of the frontier. There's always talk of strangers and caution, but we know these parts, Tobias grumbled quietly to a companion. His tone carried a mixture of protectiveness over his community and an ingrained wariness of outsiders meddling in local affairs. Margaret found herself holding her breath as she watched the exchange, a flicker of anxiety twisting in her chest. Was this outpost genuinely a refuge, or would it simply mirror the cruelty of the world she was desperately trying to leave behind? Elias, sensing her unease, offered a reassuring smile. "We all have burdens here," he said kindly, glancing at Tobias and the others before turning his gaze to Margaret. "Sometimes it takes fresh company to help mend old wounds." His words, though simple, rippled with meaning, and a silent promise of unity began to crystallize. Over the next hour, as the group settled into the outpost in the subdued warmth of a communal tin lantern, trust began to build. Elias shared a small meal, hardtack and dried fruit, while gently explaining the methods of repairing tools and navigating the treacherous local trails. Samuel listened with rapt attention, his eyes alight with the promise of learning something new. Margaret, though cautious and scarred by her past, allowed herself a hopeful smile as the genuine kindness of Elias and the cooperative spirit of the outpost slowly thawed the ice around her heart. Yet, as the rendition of this subtle communion unfolded, a gust of cold wind swept through the open doorway, carrying with a tinge of dust and a whispered urgency. Outside, fresh tracks were visible in the soft earth, a series of deliberate, well-defined impressions that were not the random passage of a wandering trader, but almost certainly heralded the approach of something or someone more sinister. Margaret's face paled as she recognized the unmistakable cadence of horses with purpose, a sound that made her pulse quicken anxiously. Elias, his calm exterior momentarily disrupted, rose to peer out into the dim light. "These aren't the gentle hoofbeats of a kind trader," he observed quietly, his voice laced with concern. "There's something else, perhaps a messenger with news of trouble." His eyes met Tobias's for a fleeting second, and even the gruff old man's face tightened with apprehension. Owen, who had been quietly listening, leaned in. "I've heard whispers of a swiftly approaching storm," he added, though his tone hinted at more than meteorological phenomena. "Some say it carries not just rain, but the burdens of old feuds, lost property, rival claims, and—" His voice trailed off, leaving the unspoken threat to hover in the room. The gathered crowd fell silent as all eyes turned to the door. For a long, breathless moment, the outpost and its inhabitants were locked in anxious expectation. Margaret's heart hammered in her chest as she exchanged a determined, albeit fearful, glance with Elias. Though the promise of newfound community had begun to soothe her old wounds, the approaching tracks and the potential threat they signified were a stark reminder that the Wild West remained a place where hope and danger danced in tight, perilous embrace. In that charged moment, with the soft glow of the tin lantern casting elongated shadows against the rough-hewn walls, Margaret realized the true way of her choice. To accept kindness in a world marred by cruelty is to risk stepping once more into tumultuous currents of fate. And just as the wind outside whispered of an approaching storm, so too did the fresh tracks of the outpost threshold hint at a new challenge, a secret message waiting to be deciphered, a danger yet to be faced. As the sound of deliberate hoofbeats grew ever nearer, and as murmurs of uneasy speculation began to ripple through the small crowd, Margaret tightened her grip on Samuel's hand. Her eyes, filled with resolve and cautious hope, met Elias's steady gaze. There in that fraught moment, they understood each other without words, a silent vow to safeguard the fragile promise of a better future for their makeshift family. Yet, just as the tension climaxed, a sharp rap thundered at the outpost door, a sound so unexpected and insistent that it sent a ripple of fear through all who were assembled. What message did this knock bring? And whose footsteps would soon shatter the newfound calm of their sanctuary? A sharp, determined knock shattered the heavy silence of the outpost common room, a sound that reverberated like a warning bell against the worn wooden walls. Under the flickering glow of a tin lantern, Annabelle, the resilient widow whose pain and hope had come to define her desperate days, exchanged a wary glance with Everett, the solitary rancher who had offered her sustenance and shelter. Their hearts, still echoing with the chill of recent hardship, paused in quiet apprehension as the knock resounded again, insistent and foreboding. Everett moved to the doorway and slowly unlatched it. Standing beneath the rising light of a pale dawn was a lean, weather-beaten man whose eyes shone with a blend of urgency and weariness. Clad in a threadbare duster and with a battered hat pulled low over his brow, the stranger introduced himself simply as Quentin. His voice, when he spoke, was low and gravelly, carrying the weight of long journeys and darker tidings. "Good morning," Quentin said, offering a measured nod. "I come bearing news and warnings that you might wish to hear." He held out a folded piece of paper, its edges frayed by wind and time, as if it traveled across many unforgiving miles. The paper's bearing and the stranger's solemn air immediately piqued Annabelle's curiosity and deepened the cautious trust between her and Everett. Inside the small room, a hush fell over the gathered few. Even young Josiah, who had been playing quietly near a window, ceased his tentative clamor and watched with wide, earnest eyes. The murmurs of the outpost inhabitants, ever wary in these troubled times, softened as Quentin slowly unfurled a note. Beneath the dancing light of the lantern, the message revealed itself in careful, angular script. "The land remembers. On the ghost well beyond the eastern ridge, secrets of old may unlock your future, but tread with caution, for those who seek to claim the earth do so with hearts as hard as stone." A pause followed as Quentin's words sank in, heavy with implications. The ghost well, a name spoken in hushed intimacies around campfires, was rumored among the rugged folk of these parts to be a relic of bygone days, its waters said to reflect the souls of those who drank from it. Its mention now stirred dormant fears and hopes alike. Everett's eyes narrowed thoughtfully as he regarded the message. "There have been murmurs for some time," he said slowly, his tone almost imperceptible as he spoke close to Annabelle. "I have heard faint warnings of a dispute brewing over these lands. A feud stoked not only by the fickle hand of fortune, but by those who claim what is not theirs. It seems the outcry was not merely a passing rumor, but something far graver." His voice carried both the steady cadence of a man who had borne his own losses and the haunted melody of someone who had learned that even the gentlest wilderness could hide lethal secrets. Annabelle's heart thumped in time with the rising tension. "Do you believe this message concerns this outpost?" she asked, her voice trembling with both vulnerability and a spark of determination. "Could it mean that our very right to this shelter is questioned?" Her eyes searched Everett's, seeking both reassurance and the truth. Quentin inclined his head. "I have seen signs on the frost-laced trails, and whispers at rival neighbors, fueled by old grudges and fear of change, stir unrest. They challenge the very order that those like you in this ranch have tried to build. I did not come to deliver an empty threat. I come with a warning that, should you not stand united, you'll find the land turn against you." His words, sparse and laden with meaning, seemed to carry echoes of bitter battles fought beneath starlit skies. Outside, the wind howled softly through the pine-shadowed valleys, as if mourning the inevitable clash of wills. The outpost inhabitants exchanged uncertain looks. Among them, a skeptical neighbor, Hezekiah, known for his terse distrust, muttered darkly about land disputes and the cruelty of expanding ambitions. Yet most kept their silence, aware that in these parts trust was a delicate commodity. In that charged atmosphere, Everett carefully folded the note and tucked it into his worn vest. "We must consider this carefully," he said to Annabelle in a low, resolute tone. "The ghost well lies farther east than most dare to venture, beyond the rocky gullies and treacherous streams that mark these lands. But if what Quentin says is true, then perhaps our future, and your child's future, depends on what lies there. His eyes glimmered with an inner fire fueled by his own past heartbreak, a secret loss that had driven him to seek refuge in the vast solitude of the Badlands. Meanwhile, Josiah, his young face earnest and reflective, tugged at Everett's sleeve. "Will we go see it someday?" he asked, his voice small yet laden with innocent hope. The child's question, simple as it was, hung in the air with the promise of change. It was a reminder that even in despair, the seeds of a new beginning might be sown. Before Everett could answer, Quentin cleared his throat, drawing all eyes back to him. "I must leave now," he stated, his gaze moving toward the outpost door, as if the chill morning air outside called him with urgency. "But heed this. The message I bring is only the start. There are others who have machinations in these lands, a few that could tear apart this community if left unchecked. Keep your eyes open and your heart steadfast." With that, he tipped his hat and departed, leaving only the sound of his fading hoofbeats and the echo of his warning in his wake. In the wake of Quentin's departure, silence descended upon the outpost, a silence punctuated only by the soft crackle of the lantern's flame. Everett and Annabelle stood by the doorway for several long, heavy moments. The delicate balance of hope and trepidation was etched into every line of their faces. Finally, Everett turned to Annabelle, the resolve in his eyes mingling with quiet sorrow. "I lost my family to those who coveted land and power," he said softly, sharing a piece of his past with uncharacteristic vulnerability. "I've sworn that I will not stand by as the same fate tries to befall others. Today, I see in you not just a fellow sufferer, but a force that might help rebuild what's been lost, to create a community where the small and the suffering find strength." Annabelle hesitated, glancing down at the small brass key she clutched for years, a remnant of happier times, when her husband had been a man of honor and hope. Now, that key symbolized her lonely struggle and the solitude of a life lived on the edge. I don't know if I have the strength anymore," she admitted in a voice soft as twilight. But then, when she looked up into Everett's eyes, she caught a glimmer of encouragement, a promise that she was not alone. That moment of shared vulnerability spun a delicate thread between them. Across the room, as the outpost occupants resumed subdued murmurs of conversation, a subtle shift began. Slowly, Annabelle found herself taking on small tasks, soothing a restless calf in the barn, helping mend a broken piece of livestock gear, and even teaching Josiah how to steady his small hands while helping fetch water from the chilly creek. Each act, though humble, fortified her resolve and deepened the budding kinship among the few scattered souls. Yet, beneath the surface of this growing blessing lay a hint of unrest, a murmur that the land itself was stirring with old grudges, and that the warning from Quentin was not a singular note, but the beginning of a discordant symphony. While Annabelle's cautious trust in Everett blossomed like a fragile rose in the morning dew, a cold wind began to whisper of a new threat. Outside, the distant sky darkened unexpectedly as if foretelling an early spring storm, and sharp, irregular hoofprints marred the soft earth near the outpost. Hezekiah, the skeptical neighbor whose eyes burned with silent accusation, leaned close to a gathered group of hands and whispered, "They say that those tracks belong not to a harmless passerby, but to a rival who has long held a grudge against Everett's land. And if that's true, then so be it. But mark my words, this feud could be our undoing." His words, twice hushed as if meant for only the courageous to hear, hung heavy with foreboding. The tension in the room grew palpable, intermingling with the scent of damp earth and the soft glow of the lantern. Annabelle's heart hammered as she stepped outside to peer toward the direction of the fresh tracks, the uncertainty in her eyes mirroring those of Josiah, who clutched his makeshift cap in trembling hands. Everett joined her on the threshold, his posture strong and protective, yet the grief of his past and the weight of his promises etched into his lined face. "What do you make of it?" Annabelle asked in a hushed tone, barely audible above the sighing wind. Everett squinted toward the trail, his jaw tightening as images of land disputes and bitter rivalries flashed across his mind. "It appears there's trouble brewing, a challenge to our precarious hold on these lands," he murmured, revealing more of the harsh reality of frontier life. "I've heard murmurs of a land feud, a conflict that could tear apart what little we have managed to salvage from desolation." Before the conversation could deepen further, a low rumble shivered through the outpost as dark clouds gathered with unexpected speed on the horizon. A soft, persistent rumble of thunder began far away, and a chill that spoke of swift, heavy rain snaked its way through the open air. The environment, already harsh, now hinted at nature's own mode of retribution, an oncoming storm that threatened to wash away the fragile hope that had blossomed beneath the outpost's tin lantern. At that moment, a final, urgent knock came again at the outpost door. The sound was insistent and almost desperate, a second messenger, perhaps, or an omen of the imminent clash between men and the merciless land. As the door creaked open, all eyes turned toward the threshold, and the atmosphere thickened with anticipation and dread. Who would emerge now? A harbinger of further troubles, or a final piece of the puzzle that could either unite the small community or shatter it entirely? Annabelle's heart trembled as she braced against the unknown, the cold wind swirling around her like whispered warnings. In that frozen instant, with the promise of storm on the horizon and the murmur of unresolved feuds among the frozen trails, the outpost's fragile peace teetered on the edge of transformation. The second knock thundered on the outpost's fragile door, a sound that split the cool pre-dawn air like a warning cry. In that charged moment, as rain-lashed winds began to stir in the distance, Annabelle's heart pounded with a mix of dread and determination. Together with Everett, now firm in his resolve and surrounded by the wary, close-knit community sheltering at the outpost, she hesitated only a heartbeat before the door creaked open once again. A lean, rugged man stepped through the threshold onto the worn wooden planks. His eyes, dark and searching beneath the brim of a dust-laden hat, flicked first toward Everett and then to Annabelle and young Josiah. This was Rufus, a messenger whose arrival was not born of casual curiosity, but of urgent necessity. His face bore the lines of hardship, and a deep sadness mingled with steely resolve glinted in his gaze. "Good morning," Rufus began in a voice that was husky as if he'd ridden through many storm-darkened nights. "I bring a warning from beyond the eastern ridge." He slowly extended a crumpled piece of paper, its edges frayed by the relentless Montana winds. As he unfurled it beneath the wavering glow of a tin lantern, the damning words etched in angular script sent a chill across the gathered crowd. "A feud, born of old grudges and bitter claims, grows in the ghostly hollows of this land. Your shelter will soon be tested by those who covet it. Stand together, or be swept away by the calamity the storm brings." The paper's declaration hung heavy in the cramped interior, its ominous tidings amplifying the low murmur of the gathering. The outpost, already tense from rumors of land disputes and the strange tracks left by unknown riders, now shuddered under the threat of an imminent reckoning. Both man and nature poised to unleash their fury. Everett's weathered face turned grim as he absorbed Rufus's words. "I've seen the scars this land can bear," he murmured, stepping toward the messenger. His voice, though quiet, carried a quiet authority. "Our prosperity here has always been fragile. We've built this community on hope and hard work. But if there's a feud brewing, if our neighbors aim to wrest this land away under the guise of old claims, then we must be ready to defend what little we have." Annabelle, who had grown from a destitute widow into a woman of steady resolve in these harsh surroundings, nodded slowly. "We have already suffered so much loss," she said softly, her tone trembling between vulnerability and authority. "If others seek to tear us apart, then we must bind ourselves together. Protect our children, our memories." Her eyes flickered to the little brass clasp she wore at her throat, a keepsake from her late husband that she cherished as proof of love and hope. Meanwhile, Josiah clung to her hand, his young face both curious and fearful as he absorbed the gravity in the voices around him. The rustle of the wind outside mingled with the distant roll of thunder. Nature itself seemed to caution them all. The storm was coming, as was the menace Rufus had foretold. Before the assembled members could plunge further into discussion, a sudden, Sharply raised shouts sliced through the tentative calm. A burly hand from among the outpost residents pointed accusingly toward the far edge of the compound. It wasn't just a rival claim, bellowed a man whose face was carved in distrust. It was Jeremiah, a local laborer known for his fiery temper and unwavering suspicion of outsiders. I've seen men loading wagons with what appears to be stolen supplies near Pine Creek. They're not merely angry, they're preparing for something. The word sent a ripple of alarm through the room. Everett, his broad shoulders tensing as he clutched the edge of a handmade table, narrowed his eyes. Pine Creek, he echoed. That's where old land grievances have festered before. Jeremiah, are you sure? His tone was both incredulous and mournful, as if the mention of that place stirred long-suppressed memories of past conflicts. Jeremiah's face flushed red as he replied, I'm sure as the dirt beneath my feet. And if our neighbors here think they can quietly take what we've built, they're in for a rude awakening, especially with a storm on its way. His harsh words clashed with a subdued murmur of worry among others. Rufus shifted his weight, his eyes flicking between Jeremiah and Everett. I caution you all to temper your anger, he said, his tone measured despite the urgency. This is not merely a land dispute. It is a harbinger of chaos. The forces stirring at Pine Creek are not one to divide us, but to seize control while our community is weakened by nature's own wrath. He paused, letting the words settle like frost on parched ground. I've ridden those trails. When the spring storms come, water has a way of revealing secrets, washing away pretenses. And mark my words, this feud might be the least of our troubles. As softer murmurs of agreement arose from a few hesitant faces, Everett cleared his throat, regaining control of the situation. We must decide our course now, he said firmly, drawing the group's attention. We can't sit idly while outsiders, whether driven by old grudges or fresh greed, seek to plunder our hard-won refuge. I suggest we secure the outpost and, come daylight, send a small party to investigate Pine Creek. Annabelle, heart-pounding yet determined, stepped forward. We must also prepare for the storm, she declared. If the weather turns foul, our defenses will be compromised. I'll see to securing the livestock and the outpost doors. I won't let fear dictate our future. Her voice, though soft, resonated clearly, as if each word carried the weight of her lived experience. Everett nodded approvingly. Your strength is the very beacon we need, Annabelle. Together, we will weather both the natural storm and the human strife that undermines our unity. His eyes briefly met hers, conveying a silent promise of steadfast support, while the community swiftly set about fortifying the outpost, shutting windows, securing doors with heavy timbers, and preparing emergency supplies. A palpable tension settled over the group. Outside, the gusts grew stronger, and dark clouds coalesced over the horizon with an almost deliberate menace. The storm's approach was unmistakable, a powerful force that would soon test their resolve. At that critical juncture, Rufus, whose earlier warnings had already set a somber tone, leaned in once more. Remember the ghost well, he intoned under his breath, a phrase that hung in the air with eerie familiarity. Legends say its waters reveal truths, and sometimes the truths we hide come crashing out when we least expect them. His cryptic words made Annabelle shudder slightly, for despite her growing trust in Everett, hints of unresolved past betrayals and land feuds remained a constant shadow. As the first heavy flakes of rain began to descend, blurring visions and softening the hard edges of the outpost buildings, a sudden crash resounded from the far side of the compound. A section of the dilapidated barn wall had collapsed under the weight of the storm's fury, sending a shower of splintered wood and dust into the midst of the gathered people. In the chaos that followed, a collective murmur of fear rose. The outpost, though held together in hope, was now vulnerable. Everett's voice cut through the panic, calm yet insistent. Everyone, to the interior, we must secure as best we can before the storm worsens. Annabelle, take Josiah with you. And to those who are able, ready your tools and help rebuild this wall. His orders, though laced with urgency, stirred the resilient spirit of the small community, uniting them to face of both nature's wrath and the lingering threat of human discord. Annabelle gathered her son tightly as she moved toward the temporary shelter, her gaze catching Everett's one last time before they joined the throng. In that brief, charged moment, she clutched the silver clasp she wore, a small, gleaming keepsake, a silent vow that whatever truths the ghost well might reveal, she would not be undone by them. Outside, the storm advanced with a fury that seemed to embody the land's pent-up grief. The heavy rain lashed against the outpost walls, and the wind roared through the pine-swept ridges like a lament. Amid this onslaught, the sound of distant hoofbeats receded into the wild roar of nature, leaving behind an uneasy calm that belied the simmering tensions. Yet, as the outpost defenders tended to their shattered wall and battened down the remaining vulnerable points, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift occurred among the assembled. One of the younger hands, a quiet fellow named Silas, stepped forward and approached Everett with a furtive smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "There's a secret," Silas murmured under his breath as he glanced warily at Annabelle, "a feud that goes deeper than whispers. They say that the ghost well isn't just legend. It's a marker of old debt, a repository of the truth about your land. Perhaps it holds keys to both danger and salvation." His words, low and dissonant, sent yet another shiver through the tense assembly. Everett's gaze darkened momentarily as he considered Silas's insinuation. The notion of the ghost's well, its whispered powers and ominous reputation, had circulated in hushed tones among the frontier folk for generations. Now, in the midst of a storm and community on edge, Silas's hint threatened to unsettle the fragile unity they had built. As thunder rolled across the darkened sky and rain dripped in steady cadence, the fate of the outpost and their fragile sanctuary hung in uncertain balance. Would these revelations lead to deeper strife, or would they forge a new understanding that could rally the community against external threats? Before anyone could answer, another resounding crash shook the outpost, this time from outside, with a sound of splintering wood and anguished shouts signaled that the storm's wrath was not spent. The outpost door rattled violently under the onslaught, and all eyes turned once more to the threshold, where shadows loomed ominously. In that heart-stopping instant, with the storm's fury echoing the turbulent whispers of old secrets, Annabelle gripped Josiah's hand tighter and looked toward Everett. Their shared gaze, fraught with the weight of unresolved past and frail hopes of the future, conveyed a silent vow to face whatever truth the land would reveal, be it salvation or deeper danger, together. And as rain pounded the earth and thunder rumbled like a vow, the fate of their small, hopeful family and the future of their hard-won sanctuary waited at the brink of an ominous unknown, leaving the outpost on the edge of a new, terrible challenge. The relentless roar of the storm had at last subsided, leaving behind a wet, weary silence that blanketed the Montana badlands in a gauzy mist. Dawn was breaking over a renewed horizon, its light fracturing upon rain-cleared ridges and revealing a battered, yet unbowed, outpost. In this tentative moment of calm, the survivors, once huddled together in fear, gathered to assess the damage wrought by the tempest and to discover a final clue that might help them navigate the troubled land and their own turbulent pasts. Caroline, a resilient widow whose days of solitude had been marked by relentless hunger and heartache, now stood amid the wreckage of what had been their fragile sanctuary. Her face, streaked with both rain and determination, was set as she surveyed the broken remnants of the old barn wall. Beside her, her young son, Benjamin, clutched a small wooden toy fashioned from driftwood, a makeshift memento of happier times, and gazed with wide, hopeful eyes at the stirring community around him. Marcus, the solitary rancher who had first extended a lifeline to Caroline in the darkness of her despair, moved steadily among the gathered, his presence both a comfort and an unspoken promise of protection. With callous hands and eyes that had seen too many harsh winters, he inspected the damaged edifice, running his fingers along splintered posts and fallen beams, as though drawing strength from the very timber. His steady voice cut through the lingering murmurs. "Let us rebuild what has been battered down. We have faced the fury of nature tonight, and though the land may be scarred, it still holds the promise of tomorrow. From the chaos of shattered wood and rain-soaked earth, a peculiar clue emerged. Amid the debris, half buried in mud, lay an oddly carved stone. Its edges were worn smooth by time, yet unmistakable symbols were etched deep into its surface. A series of marks that in local lore were said to be tied to the fabled Ghost Well. For generations, the Ghost Well had been whispered of as a site where water revealed truths, and its legend had never fully left the hearts of the frontier folk. Now, as Marcus gently lifted the stone, its mystery shimmered in the pale light like a secret refusing to be forgotten. Caroline leaned forward, her eyes fixed on the stone as though it might unravel the tangled threads of her past loss. "They say the Ghost Well shows a person what must be done. Like a mirror for the soul," she murmured, voice soft and laden with both hope and trepidation. Benjamin, though too young to fully understand, regarded the stone with childlike wonder, as if sensing that it symbolized a turning point for them all. Before this small moment of reflection could mend the shaken spirits, another sound sliced through the murmur of reconstruction, a measured, deliberate clatter that brought every heart to a sudden halt. It was not the random groan of a building settling, but the heavy, echoing tread of hooves on damp earth once more. In the distance, along a rocky trail twisted between pine-swept knolls, figures emerged from amidst. Their approach was slow yet purposeful. The air tensed, and every eye turned upward as the silhouettes drew nearer. Marcus's grip on the carved stone tightened, and he exchanged a fleeting glance with Caroline, a silent communication of shared resolve and unspoken warning. "They are coming," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the turmoil that churned like a storm within him. The approaching riders were not the marauders of old, but a rival faction of local claimants who had long disputed Marcus's hard-earned land. These men, driven by jealousy and greed, sought to exploit any sign of weakness here, an opportunity Marcus knew all too well. As the riders crested the ridge, the leader, a gaunt man with eyes like cold flint, slowed his horse and spoke in a clipped, disdainful tone. "Marcus, we've heard you've been sheltering those you deem unworthy. The land belongs to those with the strength to claim it." His words, harsh as the rocky ground underfoot, rippled through the gathered community, fanning the embers of long-held rivalries. Caroline stepped forward, her posture erect and voice clear as the breaking dawn. "This land, our land, is built not on greed but on the sweat and sacrifice of those who dare to dream. We do not yield our future to tainted hands." Her declaration, quiet yet unwavering, resonated with the assembled farmers and ranchers who had long felt the sting of dispossession. Amid the tense standoff, a sudden crash echoed from the outer edge of the camp. A fallen pine, uprooted by the storm's lingering wrath, thundering against the outpost wall. For a heartbeat, time seemed to freeze as the sound of nature's fury merged with the harsh declarations of the rival riders. The stone that Marcus held slipped from his grasp, clattering to the ground where its etched symbols caught the emerging light, casting a spectral glow that momentarily softened even the hard lines of their faces. Then, as if compelled by that mystical glimmer, one of the rival men, eyes widened as if recognizing an omen, barked an order. "Retreat! The truth of the Ghost well marks these lands as sacred." His outburst, fueled by a sudden inexplicable fear, sent the rival faction into disorganized retreat. Their riders, once so assured, now scattered into the mist as if chased by specters. In the ensuing silence, the community's tension ebbed away into a somber unity. Marcus knelt to retrieve the stone, his rugged fingers caressing the worn symbols as he whispered, "There's truth here, a reminder that the land sees all and forgives not the unjust." Around him, faces once etched with distrust softened into expressions of quiet relief. Caroline, still clutching Benjamin's hand, gazed at Marcus with new admiration, a proof that, in the heart of adversity, true kinship was born not of blood but steadfast courage. As the rivals disappeared into the distance, the storm's fury began to subside, leaving the outpost drenched in a tender calm. The collective effort of rebuilding the shattered wall turned into a unifying labor. The community, now buoyed by their narrow victory and the enigmatic message of the carved stone, worked side by side. In quiet corners, shared glances and gentle words wove new bonds of trust. Even the once dubious locals who had harbored suspicion as a shield started to see in Marcus and Caroline a capacity for leadership and redemption that could spark a new beginning. Later that day, as dusk crept once more over the rain-cleared valley and the pine-swept knolls glowed beneath an ethereal light, Marcus and Caroline stood together on the repaired porch of the outpost. The community's laughter and murmurs of renewed hope filled the air, a soft, persistent murmur that blended with the lull of the evening breeze. Benjamin, brushing dirt from his cheeks, played near the front steps, his small hands busy with a newly crafted toy that promised simpler joys ahead. Marcus spoke gently, his tone imbued with the weight of his own past losses and the hope for future reconciliation. Today, we stood together against those who would tear us apart. Let this land be proof that through unity and honest labor, we can heal even the deepest rifts. His words, sincere and unadorned, held the timeless promise of renewal in these vast, unforgiving lands. Caroline's eyes shimmered with determination as she replied, "I have known despair, and I have tasted bitter loneliness. But today, I choose to believe that our community, our new family, can rise above the cruelty of a world dictated by greed and old grudges. We are bound not by the scars of our past, but by the hope of a better tomorrow." In that moment, as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky and the last vestiges of the storm faded away, her voice was a vow, a beacon charting the course toward a legacy built on compassion and resilience. Yet even as the outpost inhabitants celebrated their small victory and began planning future fortifications, a subtle tremor of foreboding rippled through the night. Far beyond the outpost, on a distant ridge where shadows danced among ancient pines, the sound of hooves resumed, a steady, ominous cadence that hinted at challenges yet to come. A final murmur, barely audible over the whispering wind, declared that while the immediate threat had been vanquished, the land still held secrets and old feuds that could rise at any moment. Marcus gazed out toward that distant horizon, his eyes reflecting both weary understanding and cautious hope. "Our work is far from over," he stated quietly, his voice imbued with a somber promise of perseverance. "We have taken the first step toward building something lasting, a home not just for us, but for all who have suffered and yearn for redemption." Caroline, standing beside him with Benjamin at her feet, reached out and gently took his hand. In that shared touch lay the unspoken affirmation of a future forged through shared struggle and mutual trust, a promise that, even in the harsh expanse of the Montana badlands, love and unity could prevail over despair. As the night stretched on, the outpost glowed softly like a beacon amid the dark, storm-worn trails. The repaired walls, the collaborative work of hands once divided by suspicion, now symbolized a community reborn. Yet, on the far ridge, the steady cadence of approaching hooves served as a haunting reminder. The legacy of land and loss, of old feuds and the mysteries of the ghost well, might yet cast their shadow upon a newfound refuge. In the quiet lull before the coming dawn, as stars glinted like hope in the clear, post-storm sky, Marcus, Caroline, and their assembled kin stood together on the porch, their eyes fixed on the distant horizon where silhouettes of riders merged with the twilight, an open-ended promise that challenges would arise again. Still, with hearts buoyed by resilience and a shared vision of renewal, they vowed to meet whatever came with steadfast unity. And so, as the first light of dawn broke like a vow over the rain-cleared valley, signaling the end of one trial and the uncertain promise of another, their story, one of redemption, defiance, and chosen family, continued quietly on, forever etched in the wild, enduring spirit of the Montana badlands. What new challenges would the rising sun reveal?